every entity may turn into its opposite. Welcome. Today's doodle was based on the word null. And for this peculiar doodle, we are once again back with some creatures and some scenes that happened a long time ago in the Abyss Garden. And let's begin by reading one of the pathways that I used for this doodle, which is the choice, which states that each point of view has an opposite. And here it's not the original pathway that led me to these characters, but rather this pathway led me to an idea, to a notion in the Abyss Garden that we mentioned at some point, and that I really wanted to go back to in order to explain some phenomenon that happened. And basically this notion is the notion of coldness, the notion of frost, and how some places in this world, in the Abyss Garden, seem to start to struggle under a lot of winds and storms and really freezing cold events. Basically, what this card led me to, it led me back to wanting to explain this phenomenon. And so, using the other pathways, I went back to these characters that we saw quite a long time ago for the word bottle, in which basically we had these intriguing rock people that used to make function some kind of contraption, some kind of chemistry lab in which they were creating some ersatz of black sun. So we have these black suns here and there in the Abyss Garden that provide a lot of energy to the creatures and to the plants and the environments that live in the Abyss Garden. And we discovered at some point a very elusive place in which these black stars are born. But basically we had these chemists, these rock creatures, that try to create kind of a copy of some of these black suns, that try to create their own. And we've never come back to this place. And so I thought that it might be quite interesting, since these characters were able to create such complex entity, to create such complex energy generation, that maybe they might be the one at the origin of such a complex and violent phenomenon that was the frost that was starting to happen in the Abyss Garden. And so basically that's what we see. We see two of these rock people, and maybe others on the other side. We can imagine that the left side of this doodle that we don't see might be filled with other contraptions that lead to this black sun, to which we only see half of it here in the doodle. And basically using some different elements and warming up some of these glass bubbles, they managed to mix all of these ingredients together in order to create some kind of fractal goo, some kind of liquid that turns into crystals, and that ends up using the heat that it used to have and turn it into extremely cold temperatures from the outside, as if it was absorbing the temperatures that were happening on the outside, as if it was absorbing all the heat that existed around it. And in the end you have these kind of crystals that start to emerge around this glass, and to start to break, and to start to flow on the opposite direction, little by little, creating this really cold and this really windy environment. And so the second pathway that I use for this doodle was the fractured column, which states that entities grow from what once grew. And that's kind of the idea in this changing from the hot to the cold, in the sense that you had this black sun that grows inside of these contraptions, and as it gets turned into a new substance, this substance gets kind of used, gets consumed in order to grow these crystals and to spread this coldness. And so from this initial growth, you have a very different one that feeds on it and that grows from it. And finally, for the third pathway that was used for this doodle, we have the unfathomable, which states that entity's point of view can only perceive so much. And so that's quite interesting in this doodle, is that we don't really know what these rock people know about their experiments, because they seem to be enclosed in this kind of safety bubble, in a sense, that's surrounded by goo. And so you see them making these experiments, mixing these different components and elements. You have all of these contraptions, and we might imagine that they are trying to create some kind of new material, that they are trying to create something out of this black sun, out of this energy that they manage to somehow replicate. But we actually have no idea if they realize what's happening outside of their lab, because as we see it, all of these crystals that are emerging outside of the lab, outside of the bubble, and all of the heat that's being taken away from the outside. These rock people might not be aware of it, might not be aware of them, might not see what's happening, and they might be totally unaware of the impact and the result of their experiments for the rest of the Abyss Garden. So actually this frost and this emergence of really cold winds and cold places in the Abyss Garden might have nothing to do with the will of some creatures or some characters. It might simply be the byproduct of some other experiment that these rock people are doing, that these chemists are into. And so it might not at all be a malevolent reason that's hiding behind this frost, but just a really unlucky occurrence in which these chemists are totally unaware of what's happening outside their lab and how their experiments are absorbing the heat from the Abyss Garden. But anyway, so it was a bit of a convoluted explanation, but I hope you like this doodle nonetheless. I hope you like the lore behind it and the fact that we are coming back little by little to a few of these early characters. I hope you're having a nice day, a nice evening, a nice morning, and I'll see you tomorrow.